A special session of Vantage Point recorded especially for you from Taman Tasik Perdana, from the building of Yayasan Al-Bukhari, because this is where a very important deliberation is being done. That is the KL War Crimes Tribunal. And the last sitting in November, we've seen President Bush and former Prime Minister Blair being held accountable for their ability to push their countries and to start war against Iraq, for example. But for this time around, we're looking at who else should we look at, and at the same time to maybe go micro and look at specific crimes committed, for example, torture. And I must warn you, we might be talking about very disturbing things here, but it must be done because the fight for humanity starts with efforts like this. And I would like to introduce my guest for today. Across from me is Mr. Hans von Sponeck, the former UN Humanitarian Coordinator to Iraq. And closest to me, I have Mr. Naji Haraj, the former Iraqi diplomat and also a human rights activist. Just listening today at the deliberations of the eyewitness for the prosecution on torture in Iraq, and it's very disturbing indeed. And if we look at the broader picture, if an occupying force can do such things to another human being, so everything else is easy to be looked upon as collateral damage. Public infrastructure, human lives, and how would you paint the picture now in Iraq? Because maybe after a few years, people tend to lose a bit of interest. And when at the height of the war, people will be having a heightened sense of awareness. But now, maybe it's where the real fight begins. Because I've even heard at this, on the sideline, about educide, which is the genocide of education, for example. So, Mr. Naji Haraj, can you please paint the picture of how is the situation in Iraq right now?
You know, through the past 9 years, all what's happened is a continuation to the first day of the war. It's a continuation of killing, of destruction, of torture, of all the violations of the international law and UN Charter. So Iraq today, I can say, is Iraq, as you know, is gone. If you look at the Iraq today, it's a fully destroyed country. The United States and its allies, they destroy the whole infrastructure in Iraq. They destroy the social fabric. They destroy our heritage, museum, everything. And also they create the chaos. So firing everywhere, thieves were going everywhere and took all these important things. And beside that, you have the killing. And now people are talking about 1,500,000 Iraqi killed, some saying 2 million Iraqi. So you see, we are talking about millions of lives of Iraqi innocent people that have lose their life in this invasion and occupation. It is a very sad picture. If you talk about torture, you have also a high number of people. All those who happen that detained by the American or the puppet authorities in Iraq, they were subject to torture. And then after all this torture process, at the end they say to them, okay, you can leave now. There is no any charge against you. As what we heard today in the testimony before the court. So with that you have the whole infrastructure of the country was destroyed. Iraq left with no water, drinkable water, no health care. The education, Mr. Hans Sponeck, he created the word of genocide actually in the conference last year in Brussels. It is a real genocide or in the education
So
system.
the war that was initiated, an illegal war at that, without the consent of the United Nations, that was supposed to bring peace, that was supposed to do away with the threats to peace, has not even achieved any of its aim, if I put it that way, in your view.
I cannot suggest that war could bring peace. Nobody, I think, can suggest that, especially when it comes, the war is an act of aggression according to international law. So we are not, from the beginning in Iraq, nobody expects that the American are going to bring anything good for Iraq.
So how
we were living in peace.
How do we hold them now accountable? Whoever that, you know, had a hand in starting this, and now they can't even end it properly. It's worse now than it was before the war.
Exactly. This is the difficult task. I mean, this is a very difficult and delicate issue. Accountability must come at the end. But how, this is probably, it will be a very long and difficult process that all of us, we have to work on this path. We have to work with United Nations, we have to work with countries, we have to work all with the NGOs to bring this issue and to have it.
Okay. Mr. von Sponeck, from your deep reading of the situation, you were the former UN Humanitarian Coordinator. You were also the Assistant Secretary General of United Nations, but you resigned in protest of what happened in Iraq. So, can you paint to us the picture of how do we start holding all these people who were responsible to be accountable for their actions?
Well, first thing I want to say is it is, of course, necessary that any perpetrator, anyone who does something wrong has to be held accountable. The way, as far as Iraq is concerned, the way it was handled was quite differently. Accountability meant that you punished the weak and the losers, and you assigned impunity to the winners. In this case, clearly the United States and the UK, who were the initiators, not only in 2003 March. That was a continuation of a road of punishment that started really in 1990. What started as a legal decision in the Security Council to hold the government of Iraq accountable for an invasion into Kuwait very quickly became illegal by the means that were deployed. And I often think of a person who is asked to shoot at some target and hits completely the other target. The other target in the case of Iraq were innocent 23 million civilians that got punished by UN Security Council policies of sanctions, and no one was held accountable for that. And this, of course, cannot continue.
Okay, I have to go for the first commercial break, but once we are back, if I remember it correctly, nearly everybody in the world, they were talking about weapons of mass destruction. That somehow creates some false sense of justification that yes, the war should be initiated. But if we go on that premise, until now, there's no WMD ever or any proof of it. So maybe we can start from there, this trump up reason for going into Iraq by the United Kingdom and also America. And where's all that now? There's no talk about it. Nobody's pursuing it much, except maybe for initiative like the War Crimes Tribunal. That we'll discuss after this short break. Still watching Vantage Point, I want to go straight to the point where we've heard about the accusation of weapons of mass destruction, but until now, almost a decade later, we haven't seen any evidence to that. And in fact, lives and a lot of other things in Iraq, for example, has gone to a very, very bad state than before the incursion by foreign forces. So how do you look at that, and how do we justify that moving on? Because people must be held accountable, like Mr. von Sponeck said just now.
Well, first of all, weapon of mass destruction was used by the United States and United Kingdom as a pretext. But most of the people around the world was against that. And even among the member state of the Security Council itself, because there is a certain committee or commission belong to the Security Council and was entitled to follow this issue, and it was the commission was submitting reports to the Security Council, and Iraq at that time was in a full cooperation of with the commission. So in any case, they went to war against Iraq. They invaded Iraq and occupied Iraq on this pretext. Immediately after that, the United States itself, they sent a commission. It's a United States commission to search all Iraq to find this weapon of mass destruction, which they know in advance that there is no weapon. But they want to say to the world that we are trying because we have a suspicion before, and now we are sending a committee or a commission or a group of scientists to look after this weapon. And the results come later in a very detailed report that they search the whole Iraq by their group, by their people, and they found nothing. The point is, after this report, there should be something different.
Yes.
The United States, if the United States, as a permanent member of the Security Council, they should respect the Charter of the United Nations, and they should apologize immediately to the whole world.
Yeah.
Because you remember Colin Powell, their foreign minister, he went to the Security Council and he was trying to convince everybody that Iraq had a weapon of mass destruction, and that's why we are going to war. So they should, at that time, they should first of all apologize for their people and to the Security Council and to the United Nations and to Iraq.
Yes.
And this is
Point taken. Yeah. Mr. von Sponeck, if I can move on to the fact that if we look at it, yes, we want to initiate by law movement against those who were responsible, but at the same time, this is also a tribunal of conscience. So we must raise awareness around the world that what was done was very wrong and is still wrong right until now, and these many wrongs are still to be righted, and people are still suffering and suffering more and more. So how do you look at raising the moral conscience across the world? Because even if you look briefly at Fox television in America, it's so easy, people still battling on the battle drums and crying for more blood, for example, because they want to be more safe and secure. So how do you look at this?
Well, I would say, first of all, as far as Iraq is concerned, we have had three important tribunals of conscience. We have had the Istanbul Tribunal, we have had the Brussels Tribunal, and we have had the relentless effort by Dr. Mahathir to formalize the case against the perpetrators. So we have had three immensely important initiatives which are now culminating in the latest tribunal here in Kuala Lumpur. And what I would say here is the case to show that accountability as far as Iraq is concerned has now reached a point where we can make a very tight case is being reached this very moment here in Kuala Lumpur. There's enough material that has been put together. And I would also emphasize that it comes at an immensely propitious moment. Why? Because suddenly it looks around the world as if the peoples, are ahead of politicians.
Okay.
People everywhere are rising in protest over the double standard, in protest over conflict, and in favor of a more peaceful resolution of conflicts.
Yeah.
And the Iraq case and the Kuala Lumpur Tribunal fit very well in this development.
You've been in the Middle East for quite a long time. You've looked at that area specifically and under your purview in the United Nations. How would you link to what you have said just now, the movement like the Arab Spring, where people were saying that that's not going to happen? The situation in these countries are very different from anywhere else in the world. But like you said, the new generation, the younger generation, they are asking for real change.
I would say the statement that the Middle East is different is made by detractors,
Okay.
because there is enough evidence to show whether you are in Brazil, the United States, Malaysia, or the Middle East, there are reactions. People are asking for justice. People are asking for the disappearance of a double standard, and that applies as much to people in the Middle East as it applies to us in Europe or in North America or elsewhere.
I have to go for the second break, but once we are back, let's go a bit more into the specifics of things. We know there's a lot of people displaced. We know there's a lot of family institutions broken. We know that public infrastructure, even basic needs like water, electricity is struggling. We know that even if we want to give education to every Iraqi child, but who to give all this education, who to administer, because a lot of setup and human resource involved is just not there anymore. So how do we do it? Because we have heard that for the occupying forces, they have already marked out certain sectors of oil and gas and distributed whatever it is in whatever ways that they can do. But if only we can divert that to the needs of the people directly in Iraq. And how do we do that? What do we need to consider? That's after this short break. We've all read on the internet especially that this campaign of the United States of America in Iraq and to another extent in Afghanistan has cost them trillions of US dollars. But I just want to go to simple economics. For Iraq, for example, as compared to Afghanistan, it has its natural resources, and oil is a big part of that. You of all people will know that more than I do, but it's just common sense. Why can't we use the wealth of the nation of Iraq, which is oil, to help repair all the broken things, to help get back some quality of life, if not like before, at least a better one as compared to the last almost 10 years. Why is it so difficult, and why are we hearing more and more about the victors of the war aggregating it among themselves? That's the perception out there currently.
So, you know, one of the things that created by the American from the first day of the occupation is corruption. Paul Bremer, he brought the Iraqi assets that were frozen in the UN and other Iraqi money, almost 17 billion US dollar. And that's money were vanished in the first year.
Okay.
He was in Iraq until 2005.
Mm-hmm.
So there are at least 10 billion US dollar, nobody knows about them.
Yes.
So from the beginning, he gave to those who came with him, with the American, and they installed him as a governing council or as ministers. He gave cash money to each minister of them, 400 million, 500 million, without any record, without any document. And from that point, starting the stealing of the wealth of Iraq.
Mm-hmm.
Iraq is a rich country,
Yeah.
very rich country. and after the war, they lift the embargo on
Yes.
Exporting oil. So Iraq, and the oil prices went very high during the past years. So Iraq has got from 2003 until the end of 2010 almost 500 billion US dollar.
Okay.
500 billion US dollar. This is in itself would be very enough to rebuild the country.
But it doesn't go to the people.
It doesn't go to the people. It went all to the same circle that they came with the American.
Okay.
All those people, they use this huge amount of money for their benefit, for their families. And also, a huge part of it were used by the American companies, because you have in Iraq now, in any place, you will have an American company. They came under the pretext also to reconstruct Iraq. So they have map, they have projects, you can read them, very good projects, and they got the money for that project. They got the money for these projects, but on the ground, nothing happened. So that's the whole situation. I mean, now that's all where this money has gone.
Mr. Von Sponeck, of course, any sustainable humanitarian effort would need to look at governance and self-empowerment. Governance of the areas involved and self-empowerment for the people to govern their own livelihood and make a mark on that and improve day by day. You can't just give aid and expect for the aid to be continuously coming, for example. But in the case of Iraq, we've heard how wealthy it is if it's administered rightly. But that is not happening, and it's costing the people more and more.
Well, I would say, first of all, even if tomorrow morning everything would be right, the money would go where it is supposed to go, into ending the pain, into national reconstruction. Let us not forget that 20 long years Iraqi people have suffered. Infrastructure has suffered. Institutions have suffered. Educational institutions have disappeared, have been destroyed. And the brutal truth is that if you start tomorrow morning to rebuilding, you're doing this with 2 generations that are left out. 2 generations that are either dead or displaced or outside of Iraq, leading a miserable life in Syria, in Lebanon, in Jordan, of course, Egypt, and other countries. So it will be a long time before Iraq is again in balance, and we must expect immense problems of a country that should be again the model it was before. Iraq, before 1990, received a UNESCO prize for having done especially important developments in the education sector. The best medical facilities you could find in the Middle East were in Iraq also. And this, to come back to that level, will take a long, long time.
A lot of work in front of us, but we hope that your country, Mr. Naji, Haraj, will come back to its former footing or even better. But we need to start now with initiatives such as the KL War Crime Tribunal, because we want people who have done wrong must be held accountable, for example. Thank you so much, Mr. Von Sponeck. Thank you so much, Mr. Naji.
Thank you.
Haraj. Thanks to you for watching, and we'll catch you in another episode of Vantage Point very, very soon. Goodbye.